All right, people, you know that sound. The Unfiltered Band means yes, another episode of Unfiltered, another top 10 Met-centric episode. Officially, this will be episode number 168 of Unfiltered, the top 10 prospect busts for the Metropolitans. And oh boy, that's 10 of 7,312 before we lost count. And the we, myself and Brian Wright, who's back to join me. Of course, Mets historian. You can jump on board with him on Twitter and follow him on social at Brian Wright 86. We have talked about the good, the bad, and this would be the ugly because there's nothing uglier in Mets lore, if you're a Met fan, Brian Wright, than the expectations that we have dealt with, not just in seasons, which we've discussed on this show, but specifically with the next great thing that was going to save the Mets, the Steve Cohen of the player version, and how many of these we've had. And we get to go through 10 that didn't become otherworldly like they were supposed to for the Mets here today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Casey. Hope you're doing well. Also, I think I read these names and I just think of what a lot of what could have been. I remember some of these players just getting really excited as other people did, and yeah, I mean, you thought a lot of these were saviors, like you thought were saviors, and as is the case with a lot of different teams, I think we are hyper focused on the Mets for obvious reasons. As is the case with a lot of teams, there are these players that just don't work out. It happens, when it comes to like transitioning from high school to college and college to the pros. And some of these are due to just not performing up to expectations. Some of these are due to injuries, and that could be unfair to call them busts. Like as a Penn State fan and a guy who grew up watching Kajana Carter, I never like to
nice
see when
pull, by the way. Kajana Carter in the long line of Penn State running backs that failed. They had a couple that were good,
Yes.
but they did have Blair Thomas. If you're a Jet fan who's watching and needs another reason to go to therapy, there's one for you.
Curtis Enos is another one, yeah.
Oh, Curtis Enos, I forgot about him. Right, I get Curtis Enos. Larry Johnson was a Penn State guy, though, right? Was Larry Johnson Penn State?
Yeah,
okay,
he was. He was 2,000 yards, 2002.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we're getting into Penn State football here.
That's all right. I'm okay.
No. When I think of Kajana Carter, I always hear like, oh, he was a bust. Well, he got hurt like instantly. He was number one pick to the Bengals, and then just as was the case of the curse of the Bengals in the 1990s, nothing worked out. But I always hate to hear him called a bust. But at the same time, that's just the nature of how we judge. It's unfair, but unfortunately, injuries do play a factor in whether it's someone's a bust or not, unfortunately.
Well, luckily for the Jets, they ended up with Curtis Martin eventually and Corey Dillon on the Bengals side. There's your NFL focus portion of the program. We always focus on the Mets, but I want to get into a couple of other things that are sort of Met-centric at the front of this. But before we do that, because we, of course, are prioritizing, BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. Everything from the pros and college on the basketball side, UFC, MMA, and more. Latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. They've got live betting options, free contests, live scores, any sport, any game imaginable. BetOnline truly, really is the fastest and easiest way. Bet all your favorite leagues and events. Simple. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device. Then when you join, you'll get a 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit if you use this promo code. It's BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V. Again, your promo code is BELIEVE for the 50% bonus. To receive your awards, get over to betonline.ag where the game starts. I want to get started here, and let's first touch on DeGrom, because then I don't have to do anything separate just discussing this for 5 minutes. So let's just get it out of the way here. A lot of the names we're going to discuss today on this list, which DeGrom would not be on, clearly, but gave me PTSD even thinking about discussing them with you. Like, legitimately, I need to call a therapist this afternoon just to cleanse whatever we're about to talk about. How much did you feel an instinct of that when you saw the DeGrom tightness in the left side pop up literally 4 minutes into showing up at spring training and having everybody be thankful that he's there to save the franchise along with Bruce Bochy? Did it take you a second or two to realize, wait a minute, that's my ex. I don't have to worry about them anymore?
And that was my reaction when I was scrolling, like once a day scroll through Twitter and just saw Jacob DeGrom felt tightness in some headline and was like, oh no. And then I was like, oh wait, it's not our problem anymore. It's someone else's problem. And who knows what this will lead to, but we've all been there before.
Yeah, I'll give my my old buddy Corey Schwartz over at MLB.com, who I did Fantasy 411 with over there, and it's a big part of all their game day coverage for years that they've created, which they did such a great job with that at bat. But he used to say, "YPNM, your problem, not mine," and that certainly is now the DeGrom case. So we'll leave that there for now. Meanwhile, spring training, I want to just hit that just for a second because pitchers and catchers. I said this on Twitter earlier today, and I mean this, and I had the pleasure of being able to cover basketball. And it's a sport I love. I love hockey. I love football. But nobody cares about the first morning skate when the hockey season is not commencing yet. Nobody cares about the first time they show up in pads, right? Unless you're related to it or you're one of the players. Certainly it's a big deal. I get it. Or if you're covering it, maybe. Not as a fan. You don't feel that. You don't feel the first shoot around. But when I say pitchers and catchers to you, the romanticism and how can you not be romantic about baseball just hits different. Everything about it. Seeing the guys in the cages, watching a video. I must have watched 5 times 28 seconds of Verlander and Scherzer muted. You can't hear a word they're saying, just whispering to each other as they walked in. And I just wanted to see Verlander in, not even in Met colors yet, walking into a Mets facility in Port St. Lucie. How many of those vibes you feel every time we get around to pitchers and catchers, especially with the ability now in social, Brian, for us to get a sense of where we are in the country to feel that across the sport?
Yeah, I think it's a real. There's a lot of reasons why it's a special feeling. I mean, especially if you're a baseball fan. I think if you weren't a baseball fan, this wouldn't really mean anything to you. But like, when you see the players, walking in the warmth while you're, for most people, like I'm in LA, so it's it's like it's 50. So
Oh
it's
God,
really
you're in
cold.
LA. I don't even want to hear it. Please, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, but if you're in like New York or when I used to live in DC, it's 30, 20 degrees, if that, and you see players walking, in their t-shirt and shorts, and they're about to play, the game that will be lasting in the spring and the summer. They're out there throwing and hitting. The sounds of baseball, the pitcher, the hitting the catcher's glove, the ball hitting the bat, those kind of sounds. So it's aesthetically pleasing to hear and see the players, doing something that we're going to be watching. I like football. I like basketball a little more. I love baseball, and I think what creates that love and bond with a baseball team is how long you are with them, because it really is a year-long affiliation, especially if you love a baseball team, from like the hot stove to spring training through the 6 months of the regular season, and if you're lucky, the postseason. So that kind of connection is so much stronger, I think, than any other sport. And I think that's why this kind of event, pitchers and catchers reporting, or just spring training getting underway, is so special.
And look, it's an investment. It's an investment of time. It's an investment in emotion, and a lot of times in money. And because of that, we then, especially when we are suffering, we hang our hats on whatever the next thing is going to be. And a lot of times it doesn't work out. Now, look, just because it's your recency bias, it's happening now in a season since baseball ended. I'm a Knicks fan, diehard. Watching Jalen Brunson, who seemed to be, a nice player who was really overpaid, be unbelievable for them, has been a crazy surprise. I mean, he's been, are you a Knicks fan also? He's been amazing.
I am.
I'm watching him every game, and I'm like, this guy he's the best point guard they had since Mark Jackson. It was like a million years ago, right? This is amazing to watch. No offense to Charlie Ward, who was the best quarterback in New York when the Jets and Giants were so bad, and he was at the point guard of the Knicks. But it's amazing to watch. But the reason I bring that up is the juxtaposition of it is that we didn't expect that much. We thought maybe he was overpaid. The expectations were lower, and he's been way better. I think even Julius Randle in the same way, even though they're not prospects and I get their signings. It's the hubbub that surrounds the players we're about to bring up that makes it, and the expectations and the investment in your belief and faith in what they're going to bring to you, that brings you the disaster. So without further ado, let's talk disaster-ish, because at number 10 in our prospects bus, you're not going to be the only one, I think, pushing back. I mean, a lot of people are going to get on me. I admit, pulling back the fourth wall, if you will, I wanted Matt Harvey added to the list, and we have him at number 10. And I want to just explain why before, and I know you're going to tell me all the good things he did for them. And he certainly did. I mean, look, whether it's Terry Collins should have left him in the game longer, he didn't. I never have forgotten, and I was there covering it, how well he pitched in that effort. I've never forgotten the Harvey's better games against Strasburg or any of that stuff in between. However, I also didn't forget about the Dark Knight not getting the Batmobile to the park in time because he's out at Ranger games or dating or sleeping with or doing whatever he's doing with models because he seemed to care more about what was going on off the field. I haven't forgotten about the fact that depending upon who you believe, either his work ethic wasn't good enough and it was creating injuries, or he wasn't rehabbing hard enough to get back from injuries. And either way you slice it, you never heard Matt Harvey, first one there, last one to leave, like you heard from David Wright. Now, every player doesn't have to be that way, but that was never his MO. I haven't forgotten that, unfortunately or not, and we're going to get to a separate group of pitchers later on this list. I looked at Jacob deGrom, Noah Syndergaard, and Matt Harvey and that group, and we looked at them as a group. And Matt Harvey was the guy through really most of that at the beginning. Everybody had their hat on. DeGrom was a nice story. He used to be a shortstop at Stetson. We love Thor's hair, and I know he came over in a trade. But Matt Harvey, our guy, Matt Harvey's the dude. This is the Dark Knight. This guy had a bloody nose right on the screen. That one shot that you remember, the camera, he's going to be the guy. And I can't forget that even Syndergaard continued to sort of move forward, and he did have injury issues. And DeGrom went all the way up here, and Matt Harvey, seemingly because of things under his control, Brian, went the other way. That's why, I compare. Let's say that's why I compare. He's not as big a bust as some of the other guys here. Some did nothing, but he could have and should have been so great. And to me, this is not something that was out of his control. I believe things that were under Matt Harvey's control and his lack of really, to me, that Mamba mentality, to go back to basketball, if you will, and what DeGrom had as a quiet assassin with everything that he did, even though he gets injured all the time, we never question any of that with Jake. To me, that's why, to me, he's a number 10 bust and belongs on the list.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand it. I think when we initially did the list, it was like, hey, I think overhyped prospects, and then when we turned into like the prospect bust, in which Matt Harvey is more, I would say, worthy is the right word. But when I think of Matt Harvey, I think of I always wonder, and it's hard to get in his head as far as like what led to what. But to me, the Tommy John surgery that happened, I guess it came in his first full season, that injury at the end of that season, missing all of 2014, coming back for that, comeback player of the year season in 2015, which culminated in the World Series. And then to me, like the thoracic outlet surgery, that to me just kind of put everything to a tailspin. Now, I don't know if that never happens. Does all the other self-inflicted wounds, do those happen? I don't know. Does he have the confidence to still be a good pitcher and to show up to the games on time? I have no idea. So I kind of look at it as things just kind of spiraled, and it's just a multitude of things that were both in his control and out of his control, and it's hard to pinpoint what led to what. So I see it as just kind of
it's almost disappointing. Would you put it as? Is that kind of? I don't want to make it simplified, but because I know that's such a simplistic term. But is that disappointing tenure?
I was gonna say it was a sad situation in terms of just a baseball, but it's trust me, it's it's I guess it is.
Yeah, no, I got you.
He's had off-field issues,
yeah.
But in terms of just the Mets, it could have been so much more. And
yes,
he did put a lot on the line. I mean, remember the innings limit that could have happened in 2015 that he just said no.
Situation, of course. Yep.
And I think that is something to me that's commendable in a sense, that he wanted to be out there. He wanted to be out there in Game 5. He said, Terry Collins, no, I'm going back out there for the 9th inning. And Terry Collins should have taken him after the first hitter, not the second hitter, but that's another story. So I look at it a little differently as he didn't fulfill expectations and didn't fulfill the promise that he really set in 2013, but at least there was a time that you saw that potential fulfilled. It just didn't last as long as we would have wished.
And social media can change a lot of things, because the guy we have at 1, who was the first name I brought up to you when we said we were going to do this list, because he's the first guy to me that I think if you said there's no list and just ask Met fans who's the guy that comes to mind, depending upon age, if you're old enough, this would be the guy who belongs at 1. If there was social media, the one we have at 1 would have had the same hype that Matt Harvey had. and did far less as a Met. He did it in his career, just not with them. And Matt Harvey, at least, does not have anything. He went beyond and then went to this franchise, and now he's on the Orioles. And it almost became sad watching him as like, some kind of version of himself. The whole thing that happened, whether at forefront on the mound or behind the scenes with the Angels, all that. He is going to pitch in the World Baseball Classic, from what I saw. So we'll see. I mean, you kind of root for him. I will say one thing, last thing on Harvey quickly. I kind of got a little bit emotional with the way that the fans, I thought it was really cool for him because he was very humbled. When he came back and pitched at Citi Field, he was a really humbled guy who had been humbled. And I think realized all the things that had gone wrong that he created. That was kind of a cool moment that he got predominantly treated extremely well. And that's a rare thing. Look, I watched Jose Reyes get booed when forget all the stuff off the field that happened. Just Jose Reyes, the player, was a dynamic player for the Mets and now is beloved again. But when he left and signed that deal with the Marlins, even though the Mets never even offered him a contract, he got booed royally because he took $100 million. It was like he left for the money. I thought it was pretty cool, didn't you? The way that Matt Harvey, in kind of a, everybody realized how humanized he was in that moment, responded when he came back to Citi Field. I did like it.
Yeah, and I think I love that he was cheered, and I think he should be supported. And I root for him to this day. And I think in just like really everything that's come out, he's been humbled and he's been honest. So I do think he's learned a lot. So, and I think in that moment he had kind of had that realization that he had learned a lot, and as you said, he'd been humbled. So it was a cool moment to see that Citi Field was cheering for him, and I think they still are.
Matt Harvey, number 10 on the list, get to number 9. Center field is not a position in which you have a lot of players in the Mets franchise history that have performed very well, either defensively, offensively, or both. We had a stretch where it seemed like every year in the 90s, we were seeing a different center fielder. Certainly go to late 90s, early 2000s. Brian McRae, BMAC, my former broadcast partner, who I love. Matt Lawton, who was in there. We had the great season from Lance Johnson, one of the great offensive seasons the Mets have ever had. And, even Timo Perez, despite the base running blunders, or at least until then, we thought he was the second coming. But when Ryan Thompson at number 9 was first the becoming of what Ryan Thompson was going to be. And I want to give you, because this is why I know you're going to bring the actual statistics to back up what is going to be this simplified idiot thing that I'm going to tell you, that because I want to give you just the fan in me at the time, not covering the team then. What I remember looking at Ryan Thompson and being like, I used to say, like Aaron Rodgers, if you're watching him, he's like everything a quarterback should look like. The way he moves out of the pocket, the way he throws, the way, like everything. It's like a weird science movie, like built of a quarterback. Ryan Thompson was athletic. He was strong. He was big. He seemed to have tons of power. He could run in the outfield. He seemed to run the bases well, almost like a specimen that you would create to then patrol center field for you. And he turned out to be totally the opposite of all of that. A man who wore number 20 at number 9 in Ryan Thompson.
Yeah, I guess I can give you statistics, but I was a young fan, I felt the same as you. I just loved the way he looked. He was very presentable, handsome, and he was just like well built as a baseball player. And you just go, oh, he can,
this guy's gonna be the face of the franchise. He looked like he was the face of every calendar the Mets were gonna have for the next 10 years.
And I think because he came over in the trade with the Blue Jays, I guess he was a Blue Jay prospect in the Jeff Kent trade. David Cohn going to the Blue Jays at the I guess in August of '92. But yeah, I think he was just the product of a face of the franchise at a terrible time, out of a dark year in the franchise history. They were probably looking for a guy to be like, hey, here we go. Here's this guy. He's going to save us in a sense.
Was it 92? Was it 93? What was it, 92? What year was that trade?
He was traded. The David Cohn trade was in August of '92. And I mean, looking at his numbers as a Met, he played 30 games in '92.
Yes.
80 games in '93. He played
the team that you and I both think is one of the biggest. We discussed this on a previous episode. One of the biggest disasters of all time. The '93 Mets.
Yeah. And then, and then pretty much all of the strike short in '94 season and a good chunk of '95.
Joe
So for those,
Orsulak, Dave Gallagher. I mean, these are the Mets you live by. Ryan Thompson. And here's the other thing too. It's like, they gave him so many chances. Like, that's the other thing I remember about Ryan Thompson was like, oh no, it's gonna happen, because like you kept believing like he'd have one game where it's like he make a great catch in the outfield. Like, again, he's a big dude, but he had like those long strides in center field that a Beltran eventually would have, right, with an actual center fielder. But that you would look at like he could run under balls, as they say, and against Shea, Big Park, right? All those things. All I remember is how many chances they gave him. What's the total? How many games did he play with the Mets? So you got 80.
He played 283 games over 4 seasons, hit 239, on base percentage of 300. And a OPS of 717. He had 39 homers and drove in 126. So
hero.
Yeah, and look, he was given so many chances because there were so many chances to give.
Plus, that team was
chances for anyone else.
Yeah, it wasn't anybody else. But and it's funny because, and again, Matt Harvey at 10, Ryan Thompson at 9. And get us your thoughts. Get us at Casey Stern, at Brian Wright 86. Let us know if you're listening Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast, or jumping on the YouTube and comment. I'm curious because I'm sure many of you are going to say the list is wrong and this is where this guy should go. And that's the great thing about these lists in general. If you grew up and you're sitting there and that's the first Met team you ever rooted for, you might have Ryan Thompson at 9, at number 1 on your own list. Ironically, one of the other names that I said to you right off the bat, not knowing where we listed eventually, when I think about Met bust, there's different things that come to mind. And number 8 comes right off the tip of my tongue all the time for the same reason every single time. I'll go back to a Kaz Matsui episode that we had talking about some of the other failures the Mets have had. And I said about Matsui that I remember Bobby Valentine, which is true, saying he reminded him of Ichiro, and just how stupid that seemed afterwards. I love Bobby. The amount of people that were putting in articles when Alex Ochoa came over, the amount of people that were putting in articles that he was a 5-tool player, it was like literally what he was branded to be. He was going to be a guy who could do all. Now, 5-tool player at that time was so unbelievably overemphasized. And really, there aren't many players even now who you could fit into that category. Mookie Betts, one who comes to mind immediately. Sure, of course. You might have 10 guys who actually fit. It's like using ace because the guy's a number 1 in a rotation, Brian, on some bad team. That doesn't make him an ace, right? Alex Ochoa, I think he wore 22. When he came over, I was so excited about that deal because I was like, okay, here's a prospect who there was actually at that time, there wasn't a lot about prospects like there is now. And people were writing in articles, you knew him, like you had heard of him. He was a guy who came to mind like, oh, yeah, I've heard that. And at that point, that meant something to you. Like I heard that name before. I don't think he had the key to his toolbox the whole time I ever watched him play.
And I think that's like the product of these prospects being hyped up on now, like I think we can't relate. Like you go back to the 70s, I don't think they were like, oh my gosh, look at these, here we rank the top 20 prospects. They didn't do that. Nobody knew who these guys were. And it's for better and worse. And I think for like Alex Ochoa, it's for worse because you hear things, you hear 5-tool player, you hear, oh my goodness, look what he'll do in right field. And you just go, were you watching the right player, or what? And I always think about, and as you're in pain there, I always think like when players transition, I think of this like more like football and basketball. Players transition from high school to college. That's obviously a huge jump, and I feel like that is where, because sometimes like I always see like in football, like high school recruits. Like, oh my gosh. And you see like in 2013, who the highest high school recruit was, and going, I've never heard of that guy. And it just it's so drastic of a transition. And I think in baseball, I mean, the transition from the minors to the majors is so drastic that to some players, it just completely, just changes them. They're not the same players when you go into the major league level. And maybe Alex Ochoa wasn't as good as we all thought, and was just,
or
overhyped.
as good as the Orioles thought, certainly, because that's what. By the way, they did a great job promoting that. But here's the craziest part about all this, right? And that was the Bonilla deal, right? Is it Ochoa, right?
Yes.
So
Buford.
That was the other thing. It was like you were so happy about Bonilla being good. It was like, and like it made it even greater. Like he didn't even care who he was. He wasn't Bobby Bonilla, right? By the way, Damon Buford, going back to Ryan Thompson, speaking of other center fielders the Mets had, and they had 500 of them. So I just looked up just Alex Ochoa, just literally just going boom. And I put Alex Ochoa 5-tool player into Google. July 3rd, 1996, Joe McIlvaine says of Ochoa on the day he comes in, here's a 5-tool guy. Article going back 1995, 5-tool prospect Alex Ochoa running up the Baltimore Orioles system. And then my favorite, this is on ebay.com. It says 8x10 of New York Mets 5-tool player Alex Ochoa. So, but it's unfortunate that kind of became his thing, and Duke couldn't get in the toolbox. Another great outfielder, Alex Ochoa. Let's continue with great outfielders because we've got Thompson at 9, Alex Ochoa at 8, and now the first one on this list, and this is the only one other than Harvey on this list that I covered, but this is one that I covered when I was solely covering the Mets for 2 years. For their website and doing a show on Diamond Vision at Shea called Next Stop Shea at the time. And I can tell you that Lastings Milledge, who we have at number 7, when he first signed, or at least when he first was called up, and he was staying at, I think it was the Holiday Inn on the Grand Central Parkway, right near Shea and Citi Field now. They used to have, I think it was a Holiday Inn, where they would put the players where they didn't basically have official jobs yet or places to live, right? And his first game that he played, I did the ride to, I was working at MLB.com. I did the ride to the park with him from his hotel. Him and his girlfriend, true. Him and his girlfriend did the ride. And I'll never forget, and irony of irony, I ended up working years later with Gary Sheffield. Didn't know Sheff at all at the time. But ironically, one of the questions I had was, because I had seen video of Milledge, was why do you do the bat waggle? Which he did. For those who don't remember, Milledge did the Gary Nobody does that. One of the reasons you don't do that is because Gary Sheffield, for those who didn't follow, had bat speed like Mookie Betts. But you can't, unless Mookie Betts could do that if he wanted. You can't do that because you can't get the bat in the zone quick enough if you're doing that in your shoulder. So if anything, you see guys who try and almost the bat's coming through the hitting zone on their stance. They're trying to get it. So, but not Lastings Milledge. He bat waggling. I asked him why. And his reasoning was, because I thought it was cool. And immediately I remember saying to myself, this kid has no chance. I immediately remember telling my cameraman, Tom, give him a shout out this time. I remember telling him after we got out of the car, nice kid. I was like, this kid has no chance. Now, I didn't know he would have, and ironic, I worked with Jim Bowden, who was a broadcast partner, who ended up trading for him for Ryan Church. And I often joke with Jim, the 6 years I worked with him, that he didn't know at the time, for those who don't remember, Lastings Milledge ended up having real big eye problems and depth perception issues, which phased him out of the game. It wasn't even just that he was a bust, but when he left the Mets, when he went to the Nationals and forward, he's still a young kid. His eye issues ended up he couldn't catch the ball and couldn't run around the outfield, and then he had no value. But Lastings Milledge, to me, I will always remember being a kid who, between the high fives and what I knew of him the first time I met him, just immediately, I think between the years was a bigger problem than anything else. He just was a guy who really didn't get it. And I hate saying that, but that's the way I look back at our number 7, Lastings Milledge.
Yeah, and I'm not going to classify him as not. He may not have gotten it. I just
in terms of he was not going to learn the way he needed to learn, which is why he rubbed so many of those veterans the wrong way. And that team couldn't stand him, and he had know your role in the locker and all that stuff. I was covering the team then. And a lot of that came down to he just didn't really have a good sense of doing things, I hate saying this, the way like David Wright did when he came in which he garnered himself immediately to the Doug Mientkiewicz and the Cliff Floyds and the Paul LaDucas and all those other guys. Lastings Millage immediately kind of separated himself as somebody who was about Lastings Millage, and he wasn't good enough to do that. He was not Ronald Acuna Jr., let's say.
Yeah. I mean, you can have your own personality and also like know that you need to, to learn and to develop before you can, have your own, I guess, your own style. If I'm saying that correctly, I think I just rambled. But when I think of Lastings Millage, I think of that game, the high five game in, I guess it was June 2006, and I swear he hit the home run off Armando Benitez. I don't know if this is true.
Oh, maybe.
Just, like, melding moments together because I think Armando Benitez was pitching for the Giants at the time. Anyway,
anything anti-Armando Benitez, I'm fine with, so that's okay.
I knew I would make you happy there.
That's okay. I'm fine with that.
I knew it because I think he hit a home run, was at the top of the 10th, and then he comes out and it comes out the field, does the high fives, and I think it was it Billy Wagner was the one who really came out and said like, oh, there's no place for that or something like that. Yeah, okay.
Billy Wagner was
yeah, I don't want to say that totally set him on the ruined him or was like basically when you knew it was all over.
In the room, maybe. Ridiculous. In the room, maybe. In the room.
So I just think about that and how kind of unfair that was to him. That being said, maybe it still would have ended up the way it did, but I just think of that and go, I just feel like he could have been maybe supported a little better. And I'm saying this from afar as opposed to you covering it. But I feel like in that situation, if it had been maybe privately, someone might have said, even though I don't think that was a problem to high five fans. If that happened today, I don't think anyone would care. I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, he's, look at him grow the game. Look at that. I think back, I'm saying this like this is ancient times, like 2006, I think there was more, like, oh, you don't do that here. And
with
like,
that
was
team,
it that big of a deal?
And with that team, the problem is
the veteran team.
Here's where, the what if. I love what ifs in general. They're fun conversations, but here's where the what if comes in. If Lastings Millage is on the team in '93 and the one in '92 when Ryan Thompson comes, right? Reverse the roles. He's not just playing in 60 games like he did the next year and getting only 280 at-bats or whatever it was. But you had Cliffy on this team. You had Beltran on this team. You had a team that was trying to win a World Series. And you were just a guy trying to kind of fit in. By the way, very much like our number one was when he came in terms of that, right? But they gave him much more run, as you would say, than Lastings Millage got here. But, if there's one thing that, okay, maybe not fair to Millage, in addition to, I'm with you, you're right. I mean, that shouldn't cancel you out that's not enough to be what we call a deal breaker, right? In the relationship with the team or the fan base. But if he's in Thompson or Alex Ochoa land, right? He getting 500, 600 at-bats, Brian, and he could hit 230 with an OBP at 300. Lastings Millage never was able to play every day because there wasn't a spot for him every day. And again, I'm not making an excuse, but I think being fair, and I like how the list ends up this way with those three outfielders, Millage probably gets at least a much better chance in the other two spots to show you what he can do than on the team he was on.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like if he came up in 1993, he'd have the Ryan Thompson rope.
Yeah, which was a long one. 10, Matt Harvey, 9, Ryan Thompson, Alex Ochoa at 8, 7, Lastings Millage, and then Sean Abner at 6, kind of splitting up our outfielders. And when we go to the mound on the pitching side with what I would say probably is collectively the biggest bust phenomenon the Mets have ever had, why does Abner and where does he fit in the Swiss cheese? Because he's going to get lost in this list by a lot of people who say, wait a minute, Abner, I heard of that guy. He was a tough, but this is where you were supposed to be based on draft and who you were as a prospect, more than stories like we saw play out with Millage and Ryan Thompson on the field.
Yeah, and to be and maybe by the fact that he didn't ever play a major league game, he never even got to the majors,
which
Mets,
is not good.
It's not good. But maybe you never know if like they had kept him before he got traded, so he was in the Kevin Mitchell and Kevin McReynolds trade. If they had held on to him, and you never know what had happened. But as it turns out with the Padres, he didn't do very much. And I think he played with the Angels and the White Sox and didn't do much either. So So to be honest, I don't know much about Sean Abner other than the fact that he was the number 1 overall pick in 1984, and he was in the Kevin Mitchell and Kevin McReynolds trade, which
and went to prison. Now, look, according to Wikipedia, I did not know this, but went to prison for animal cruelty.
Which is a whole.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
I'm looking
My
at
God,
that.
I didn't even know that.
I
didn't
am
even
looking
know
at that
that
right now.
I did not even know that.
I wish I put him number. I put him number 1 for that alone, but
well, that's fair. That's a look, as a dog lover, I get that, but I didn't even know that. According to Wikipedia, because who knows? Joe West is editing his own Wikipedia, so who knows? In 2019, he was charged with animal cruelty, leaving his 14-year-old husky alone at home for over a month. Jeez.
Oh, no.
My goodness. My goodness.
Oh,
yeah, we should put him at his own spot on the list. But Sean Abner never even getting to play a game. And look, we said this about the Vince Coleman scenario, right? Sometimes it's just how off the grid and how terrible these stories get that end up making you a bust from what you weren't supposed to be, doesn't even get to the league. And look, the Mets have had a lot of guys that were, you think about Billy Beane, right? And how many other busts have been as players who never panned out for the Mets. We've also seen those who have shown us flashes and taken it away from us. We did not have enough of that with Millage or Ochoa or Thompson. We did with Matt Harvey. We've got a little at number 2-ish, and a lot of that flash stuff at number 1. But in 5, 4, and 3, the next 3 spots, which we'll do together, we'll do them individually and together. It's the most hype on this list. And I would say in an era where there was no social media, none, Generation K had more hype than Matt Harvey, Jacob deGrom, and Noah Syndergaard. Noah Syndergaard might have been Thor, and Matt Harvey was a Dark Knight, and DC Comics and Marvel had movies at the time, and they didn't then. And we didn't have Twitter. There was no Instagram. There was no way to yell at each other except to call someone on the phone or be at the bar. But I remember being at Jones Beach. I remember, as a fan, listening on the then old school boombox with the antenna like this and trying to get your spot, because I was not going to miss a pitch that Paul Wilson, Bill Pulsipher, Long Island Duck legend, Bill Pulsipher, and Jason Isringhausen, who was a terrific pitcher as a closer, came back to the Mets late, was great with the Cardinals and the A's, had a great career of the 3, right? And certainly avoided the injuries, especially with Paul Wilson with the elbow, Reds and Mets, right? Mm-hmm. But I remember every pitch needing to be there. And that's with no social media. That's with everything by word of mouth and newspapers. That tells you just how big and how hyped they were. And I think, and I'm curious, people get us at Casey Stern at Brian Wright 86. I think if I were to ask any Met fan, not list, not player, what's the best example? If I say to you, Mets overhype, Mets disappointment, Generation K, the first thing out of every single Met fan's mind, in my opinion, no doubt about it. And they belong in this list. We've got Izzy, then Wilson, then Pulsipher at 5, 4, and 3.
Yeah, and you have your memory of Generation K. I have mine. I have 2 memories. I had a Generation K poster. I'm still trying to find it, like not the physical poster. I'm just trying to find it online because I certainly don't have it. I haven't stored it away in like my dad's.
Would you keep it with your Dilson Herrera poster?
Yeah, no. I had it hanging in my bedroom. A Generation K poster.
Yeah.
Wow. So I had that, and I was, as a very impressionable kid, I thought it was like, my dad hyping me up too, just as much as, like the magazines and newspapers, like going, oh my gosh, these 3 pitchers are gonna carry the Mets through the future. And
heroics.
Yes. And on top of that, I was at Jason Isringhausen's first victory in 1995 against Pittsburgh at Shea Stadium. And I remember like my dad saying something to the effect of like, oh, you'll remember where he's a guy, he's usually not that impressionable. Usually, he take time before he's satisfied and happy with a player. But he was like trying to tell me like, oh, this is a memory you'll know forever. And I guess I do remember it basically because of now and the fact that it didn't turn out well. So Isringhausen, I remember he started like 95, his time in 95 really well. Like
he was 9-2 was like his first season.
Yeah.
I don't remember the ERA was also good, but I do remember 9-2, which then was a big thing because then we didn't look at things the same. And the fact that his record was 9-2 is what you brought up immediately. But that's what I remember. He was 9-2 as a start.
And all three just had their injury problems. Although
Wilson's
injuries were
yeah.
And Isringhausen was the one who really. I mean, Wilson pitched. I think he pitched for like Tampa Bay and later, but to me, Isringhausen is the one that salvaged his career. Yeah,
right.
Cincinnati.
Too. Yeah.
But Isringhausen to me salvaged his career in a sense by being an effective reliever. Yeah, over 300 saves. So with Oakland and St. Louis, and he came back to the Mets as a reliever in 2011, I think. So he was the one that I guess you could say made the most of a bad situation with the injuries they were dealt with. But so like. Pulsifer is like the one I was like most excited because he was like left-handed. I don't know. I don't know why I was more excited about him, but he was the one who I don't know what happened. And just that was probably the biggest flame out. And then Wilson we have number 3. And the reason I put him number 3 is because he was the number 1 overall pick in '94. So he was kind of by default and by draft pick, the most hyped of the 3.
I would say when you think about Omar Minaya, as we get into our next spot on the list, he does not get enough credit for some of the names that he pulled into this team. And look, there were things that he did not do great. And there were issues that I had with him, including that when they finally got to the precipice and you realize, hey, we got here with John Maine and Oliver Perez. Like, you realize how good your team could be if you actually went and got another starter. Like, there were things about his run that will always stick out to me that just weren't good enough, right? Not pushing over the edge. I know the Wilpons were there. And he got a lot right. But when I think of Omar Minaya and the one that he was tied to that he got the most wrong, or seemingly went the most wrong, it's this one at number 2 with not Kmart, because that was the store people went to, not JD Mart, even though he's on the Dodgers now. Not V Mart, the great Victor Martinez, but F Mart. Fernando Martinez, who Omar Minaya was like prognosticating, to use it in Groundhog Day. And every Met fan was jumping on board. And this is at the beginning of when you're right on the edge of social media and everybody knowing more about prospects and very, very much Alvarez like now. Right, in the way we talk about him. And I don't remember where Martinez landed in terms of overall prospects, but that's how Met fans, this was the guy, the savior. And here's how I remember him. Didn't he play for the Astros for 16 minutes? If you ask me Fernando Martinez, I can't tell you literally anything else about Fernando Martinez.
I mean, a lot of people drank the Kool-Aid when it was 2000. I remember this in college because Millage was the guy, the big prospect when I was in high school. And then when I was a kid, obviously we talked about Generation K, but when I was in college, Fernando Martinez, oh my gosh, he's going to be amazing. 2007, I think, was when that really started. And that was kind of just that hype machine was really cranked up. And like I said, I don't know where he was ranked, but he to me is the equivalent. I'm not saying they're going to turn out the same way, but he is the 2007, 2008 equivalent of what Francisco Alvarez is now.
Yep.
Where it was just like, oh my goodness, this guy, this is the real thing. And, that was I don't want to say it was a great PR job, but we were all sold on that. And then when I don't remember about any injuries that happened to him. I'm sure there were.
He was just a bust.
He was just a bust. Yeah. I mean, maybe he was. I'm looking at Wikipedia. He was named the Mets number 1 prospect for 2007 and 2008. And then it does say that he had some since on the disabled list. Nothing like serious, nothing maybe serious, but
I don't think. I think it just was a mess. And the irony is, and I've always remembered this about Fernando Martinez and thought of it this way, because I'm going to bring back and rope back in JD. For those who don't remember, JD Martinez, when he came up Astros, right? And I think it was there around the same time as F Mart, actually, about 2011-ish. JD Martinez was so bad he got released. He got time with the Astros. He was a top prospect, got released. I remember asking Dave Browski when he was with the Tigers, about, just waxing poetic about how brilliant a move it was to pick him up. And he said to me on the air at the time of Sirius XM, he said that it was lucky. They had no idea. They just took a shot on JD Martinez. For those who don't remember, JD Martinez is one of the first ones who went and totally retooled his swing. The Justin Turner, Marlon Byrd scenario, the Chris Taylor after he was on the Mariners. We see this a lot now, but it was not a thing then because high top prospects never really went back. They always were too egotistical to go, and this is how I hit, is how everybody used to say. He totally retooled his swing. But I always remember about the fascinating part of JD Mart and F Mart is that Fernando Martinez never had that with anyone else either. It wasn't like with the Mets, he left and then suddenly somebody found something, just disappeared. And that was it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I guess that's the one silver lining is, I guess that's the one silver lining is that it was like, not like he found it somewhere else. It's not like, like a Justin Turner who struggled with, was okay with the Mets and then found it with the Dodgers.
Yeah, thank you, Marlon Byrd, for that. Hey, you want to come meet with my hitting instructor? And then all of a sudden he becomes amazing. Number 10, prospect bust, Matt Harvey. Number 9, Ryan Thompson. Number 8, the 5-tooler, Alex Ochoa. Number 7, he of the high fives, Lance Diggs Millers. Number 6, the dog of the list, I will say. Now, Sean Abner at number 5. Izzy Pulse, of course, at 4. 3, Paul Wilson. They together are not the Pointer Sisters, but Generation K. Number 2, Fernando Martinez. And then number 1, when we said what list should we do next, and we said bust and prospect, mishaps and overhyped players, the first thing I said was Craig Jeffries. We could have called this the Greg Jeffries list. Greg Jeffries, to me, was... And this was at a time where in my childhood, I was first really getting into baseball. This was the example of, in my youth as a kid, a top prospect failing. In any team I rooted for, this was the closest I came to it. Because I remember being a hockey fan as a kid, and Pat LaFontaine was like the thing for the Islanders. He ended up having a very good career, a Hall of Famer eventually. There were, like, Patrick Ewing got drafted for the Knicks, and look, that panned out pretty well. Greg Jeffries was coming on board to a team that was full of savages, to use the Aaron Boone line. And he was still getting playing time because that's how good people thought he would be. And I know this sounds weird, but the thing that always stands out to me, Brian, and you could go back and look pictures now at the early Greg Jeffries. I remember feeling like he's like me because I thought Greg Jeffries looked like he was 10. Like, he had such a boyish smile and was so, like, happy, like the Jose Reyes kind of thing that he had when he came, like smiling ear to ear, so excited to play. And among all these stars, yet had the stance, had the way you want to look. I mean, everything in single digit. You don't give single digits to guys who can't play, right? I mean, everything you could ever want. And he getting playing time with these guys on the late 80s teams. And he would eventually show a lot of that somewhere else in Philadelphia. But Greg Jeffries, to me, the ultimate example, and belongs number 1 on the list, I think, in Mets all-time, in their lore, in their history. He is the greatest example of overhyping in a prospect that did not pan out because he looked like Roy Hobbs when he first came up as a Met.
Yeah, I am totally with you. And when I think of this kind of prospect bust, I mean, he is like the poster child. He's the template in Mets history, especially for that. He was named minor league player of the year 2 years in a row, 87 and 88. And also, he was put on a pedestal by Davey Johnson, by Mets management as this second coming kind of thing. So that, and when he came up in really for good in late 88, I mean, like you said, they were battling for a division, battling for a World Series. That was obviously a veteran team, a great team, 86 champions, going for a second in 3 years. And when you bring this young guy who looks 10, is going to take the job of Wally Backman at second base, who was beloved by fans, beloved by teammates, that didn't sit well with those veterans, and that raised the pressure on a guy who was already propped up. So, and in 98, the rest of 88, he was fantastic, and that I don't know whether that helped him or hurt him, but it certainly added to the already lofty expectations, because then he went on to the postseason roster, and it just never got any better. It really just went all downhill. He was a combination of a lot of the people we have talked about. I mean, the whole being on a veteran team, like the situation with Lastings Village, and kind of not really getting along with those veteran teammates. Being unable to handle New York as, maybe like a Matt Harvey was, because at times the pressure really got to him. I remember, what was it, 91? He wrote that open letter that was run on WFAN, talking about the pressure and how he's being treated. So that's really when everything came to a head. And as you pointed out, it worked out in a sense.
St.
He was an
Louis,
all-star. St. Louis, he was an all-star, I think twice. I think he was an all-star starter in '94.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, in Philadelphia, he was a decent player. So I think that just goes to show. I mean, maybe that's also what puts him over the top, is that he just didn't work out in New York, and it kind of worked out somewhere else. So it just it's the old change of environment that really helped him.
And makes it seem worse because you don't have like a F mark. Where'd he go? Nobody else. Because 1993 for the Cardinals, he had 342 with an OBP of 408 in 612 plate appearances. And then in 1994, as you mentioned, starts an all-star game. And he was an all-star in both years. He started the game in 94. That year, he hit 325 with a 390 OBP. And, look, hit 306 the following year. I mean, he had some good years over his, a 14-year career. If you think about kind of the average season, if you you do it that way, 14 homers, 73 ribs, 289, 344, and a 421, about a 770 OP. Look, he ended up having a pretty decent career. It just wasn't with the Mets, where he was supposed to be the second coming. I mean, everything ever thought, if you're a Yankee fan, of Kevin Moss or Shane Spencer, you take that times I don't even know what, to Greg Jeffries, who I want to call Craig just because I don't want to remember Greg. We remember this. You can always jump on board, give us your list. What did you think about a top 10? Get us on the Unfiltered Revolution at Casey Stern, at Brian Wright 86. Let us know your thoughts. Thank you to all of you. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. Those of you on Twitter and YouTube as well. Brian, we'll do this again soon. Hopefully, now we've been up, we've been down. Next time we're going to do something happier next time, right?
Yes.
So we're going to talk about Pacoda saying the Mets are going to win 97 games. Pacoda, who every year I'm like, how the hell do they know anything? Then when I saw they said the Mets would win 97, I said, Pacoda, such smart people. You smart.
They know what they're talking about.
Oh, of course they do. On board with us right here at the Unfiltered Revolution. Unfiltered, as always, brought to you by BetOnline.